Reserve Bank Governor Philip Lowe doesn't expect the economy to go into recession, but there's more rate rises in the offing. Big spending budgets from New South Wales and Queensland with a sting in the tail for coal miners, and Qantas drops the requirement for face masks. It's Wednesday, the 22nd of June, 2022. Welcome to Fear and Greed, Australia's most popular business podcast. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael.
Big day today, Sean.
It is. I wasn't sure whether you were going to say it or I was going to say it. You go for it. Big day for us.
Yeah, it really is. It's actually been a big week because at some point this week, and it's a bit hard to pinpoint exactly when that moment was, but we have ticked over a very, very significant milestone for Fear and Greed.
That's right. 5 million downloads for this financial year. So since July 1, 2021 through to now, more than 5 million downloads, which we're really proud of.
We certainly are. And of course, it makes sense for Fear and Greed being a business podcast to measure our downloads across a financial year, doesn't it?
It does.
Because it's just quite a natural fit. But we are, of course, Fear and Greedy for more.
Oh.
I have so much regret over saying that, but I'm going to stick with it. Look, we are very grateful to everyone who has listened, and we are extraordinarily grateful as well to anyone who has told someone else about Fear and Greed, because so much of podcast growth comes from word of mouth. And so if you are someone who has spoken to a colleague or a friend or a family member and told them about the great business news podcast that you're listening to every day called Fear and Greed, thank you very much, because it's because of you that we've been able to grow to this point of having 5 million downloads across a fiscal year.
And if you don't like us and you've told friends not to listen to us, bad luck. We've 5 million downloads. There you go.
That's right. In spite of you. No, we are. It's probably a terrible way to end that. But anyway, Thank you. Thank you very much. 5 million, and look out, 6 million. We are on our way. Sean, immediately after the show, you've got a fantastic chat to Shehryar Antia, who's from the global fund manager PGIM. He really gets stuck into cryptocurrencies.
Not a fan, shall we say. He has done a report, or PGIM's done a report recently on cryptos, and he basically outlines why he doesn't think investors, or certainly institutional investors, should buy into cryptos. It's a very interesting chat.
Yeah, sure is. But the main story this morning, Sean, Reserve Bank boss Philip Lowe yesterday said that he doesn't believe there is a recession on the horizon, even as interest rates rise.
Yes, Dr. Lowe said the fundamentals of the Australian economy are strong, households aren't overly indebted, and companies are willing to hire people. Those two facts don't seem like a precursor to a recession, according to Dr. Lowe. While the record low unemployment rate might rise, it's not necessary to go much higher to get inflation back down to the 2 to 3% range. The fact that inflation is high everywhere demonstrates that global factors, as much as local factors, are playing a role. So he's talking about supply chain disruptions, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, higher oil and food prices, and rising demand globally. And in an interconnected world, Australia gets hit with inflation too. But Dr. Lowe said there are also local factors. Households are spending more post-COVID. There aren't enough staff available in many areas, with the construction sector operating at close to full capacity. One of the most critical challenges for the economy, he said, is making sure inflation expectations don't become entrenched.
Sean, his comments came ahead of the release of the minutes of the Reserve Bank board meeting of 2 weeks ago. The minutes showed that the board considered lifting interest rates by 25 basis points at its last meeting, but in the end opted for double that, 50 basis points, basically deciding that rates needed to rise fast.
The minutes of the meeting have such a different tone from minutes of a few months back. Back then, there was no rush to lift rates. Now the board is worried that the cash rate is so low at a time when inflation is high and labour market is tight that it really needs to shift quickly. Significantly, the minutes say the mindset of Australia is shifting and businesses have become more willing to pass on costs. That's the sort of environment where you get persistent rises in prices, the board says. The inference in all of this, Michael, is that the board has decided it needs to move fast, fearing price rises will become entrenched in the economy. And it knows that more rate rises are necessary to deal with inflation. Okay, so none of this is totally new, but it's quite astounding how quickly the Reserve Bank board has changed its mind on rates.
So what's it all mean then, Sean? What's going to happen to interest rates now?
We know they're going to rise. Both the Reserve Bank board minutes and Dr. Lowe said that yesterday. The governor said rates are too low for an economy with low unemployment and high inflation. Fair enough. He added that there is not a preset path, though, for interest rates, and how fast rate rises occur and how far they go will be guided by data on the economy. But he also added that he thought 4%, as predicted by financial markets, is probably too high. Remember, we're at 0.85%. If we got to 4%, we'd be talking about home loan variable rates of 7 or 8%. And the governor yesterday suggested might be a touch high, though he also conceded that financial markets had predicted interest rates better than the Reserve Bank had in recent times.
Yeah, acknowledging that there was a little bit of reputational damage done, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, it was. And I mean, it's true that they just haven't done a great job in predicting where the economy, and particularly inflation and interest rates, are going to go.
Yeah. All right. How did local markets fare yesterday?
The S&P ASX 200 finished up more than 1%. That was the first rise in 8 sessions, helped by energy and financial stocks. Woodside led the way, rising 3.3%, while the other giant in that sector, Santos, rose 1.2%. Beach Energy was up 4.5%. I mentioned the banks did well. National Australia Bank led the way, up nearly 4%. Westpac and ANZ were both up more than 2.5%, while Commonwealth Bank jumped 2%. Iron ore prices also rebounded somewhat, having fallen sharply on Monday. BHP rallied 1.7%, Rio Tinto was up 2.3%, and Fortescue ended 3.5% higher. The biggest falls, though, came among the Queensland-based coal stocks after that state's government upped royalties imposed on the miners. More of that shortly. Bowen coking coal fell 39%, while Stanmore Resources dropped nearly 10%. There was some good news in that sector, though. Whitehaven Coal's share price jumped by almost 8% before finishing 5% higher yesterday on the back of higher coal prices. Notably, Whitehaven is based in New South Wales, not Queensland.
And what about global markets?
Things appear just a touch steadier for now, though admittedly the benchmark for global markets when it comes to steadiness is pretty low. Cryptocurrencies gained some ground over the past 24 hours after their recent big falls. As I mentioned, things were slightly improved in commodity markets as well. Remember, many commodities tumbled on Monday. The Aussie dollar, Michael, is trading just under 70 US cents.
Okay, we'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, the New South Wales government has handed down a budget full of goodies, which it hopes will be funded by the property market, by foreign investors and by gaming revenue.
Yeah, State Treasurer Matt Keane said the economy should expand by 4.25% in the next 12 months. Reasonably optimistic, I would say. The budget deficit will soar, though, to $11.3 billion next year, and total debt will hit $114 billion by 2026. But now is not the time to slow spending, the Treasurer said, and the state will return to surplus over the medium term. In other words, he's saying plenty of investment now will provide returns later to pay down the debt. Sounds very political to me. There's money for childcare and parents of school children. There's also $1.2 billion to help in the renewable space. As already announced, the government will trial a shared equity program for some workers buying a house. Premier Dominic Perrottet's long-held desire to abolish stamp duty on homes and be replaced by land tax took a baby step forward yesterday, with first homeowners allowed to opt into the scheme from next year. Now, the New South Wales Coalition has been in government for 11 years and it faces the electorate next March. But this is Mr Perrottet's first budget as Premier, having last year replaced Gladys Berejiklian. Michael, I reckon it looks like an election budget.
Yeah, plenty of goodies. I reckon you might be right. And the Queensland government also released its state budget.
Yes, no need to worry about the electorate for another couple of years in Queensland. The big miners were the ones that were hit really hard. In fact, they're going to have to pay new coal royalties, and the government will use the money to fund health and transport projects. Royalties have been frozen for 10 years in Queensland, but that 10 years ends on June 30. Now miners will have to pay royalties depending on the price of coal. Given current prices are above $500 a tonne, miners will need to pay a royalty of about 40%. It's massive. There'll also be a new payroll tax levy to fund mental health services over the next 5 years in Queensland, and there's plenty of money for infrastructure. Budget deficits of more than $1 billion will return from next financial year. That budget, the Queensland budget, is the one that really knocked the coal miners yesterday.
Sean, you know how I'm a bit of an ideas man.
Yes.
Don't you think it would be a great idea for all states and territories to release their budgets on the same day, just as New South Wales and Queensland have done? If suddenly Victoria and WA and Tasmania and everybody all joined in on the same day, wouldn't that be a very efficient way of operating?
Not as a journalist, no. Could you imagine how busy we'd be?
Yeah, but it's no different to being busy for, say, the federal budget, and then all of a sudden all the state budgets all come out on one day. Wouldn't that just be so neatly packaged up rather than having them sprinkled throughout the year?
You're an ideas man, no doubt.
All right, that's right. Now, Sean, the end of the financial year is little more than a week away, and with financial markets having sold off so ferociously, many super fund members might find their holdings fell during the 2022 financial year.
And it would be the first time in more than a decade for most people that they went backwards in terms of their super fund. Research house Chant West estimates the median growth fund, which has between 60 and 80% of money devoted to growth assets like shares, will end the financial year down 5%. Now, that's better than the share market itself. The ASX 200 is off around 10% so far this financial year, while Wall Street is off nearly 15% or thereabouts. The difference between the 5% and those numbers is the performance outside of equities, assets like bonds or cash or alternatives. A negative result would only be the fifth such result in 30 years since the introduction of compulsory super in 1992. Also, members need to keep in mind that last financial year, the average growth fund rose 18%. So a 5% drop net still ain't too bad. Mind you, no one likes to see their super go backwards.
Yeah, fair enough. Sean, Qantas has announced that face masks will no longer be required on non-stop international flights to the US, UK and to Italy from Australia.
That's right. In an internal memo, Qantas called it an important step. The decision was made in line with changes made to airport requirements last week and came into effect at 1 minute past midnight last night. Great news for travellers. The bad news is that airports are already warning there's going to be long queues this holiday season. Sydney Airport Chief Executive Jeff Colbert said it was great people are travelling, but the terminals will be very busy. Sydney Airport is expecting 2.1 million travellers between this weekend in July 17. That's many more than the 1.8 million passengers over the Easter period, which also encompassed school holidays. The queues then were horrendous. They're warning that it could be just as bad.
Yeah, stand by for chaos. Energy Australia, Sean, the nation's third largest electricity company, has released a profit warning after suffering from volatile power market conditions and ongoing issues running its two big coal-fired power stations in Victoria and New South Wales.
Yeah, this is the flip side. We are all a bit down on the generators not producing enough electricity, but the point is they're not making anywhere near as much money because of costs of supplies at the moment. Energy Australia has been forced to buy expensive supplies to meet customer contracts and cover a shortage of generation, according to a report in The Australian. The Melbourne-based company, which is owned by Hong Kong CLP Group, has suffered a series of outages at its Yallourn coal plant in Victoria and has endured several years of coal supply problems at its Mount Piper power station in New South Wales. Energy Australia's contribution to its parent's operating earnings for the 5 months to May 31 was more than $1 billion Hong Kong dollars lower than the same time last year.
Wow. And finally, Sean, consumer confidence jumped last week.
The ANZ Roy Morgan Weekly Survey showed a rise in sentiment. ANZ's head of Australian economics, David Plank, said it probably reflected the strong labour force data out last week.
All right, moving on to overseas news. First, it was Germany, then Austria, now it's the Netherlands. Countries are reviving their coal-fired power sectors.
European countries are far and away the most advanced in harnessing and delivering renewable energy, but the crisis flowing from Russia's invasion of Ukraine has changed thinking around energy. Yesterday, the Netherlands removed limits on power production from coal-fired plants to help ensure energy security. The plants can now operate at full capacity for the next couple of years. In recent days, the governments of Germany and Austria have made similar moves. Of course, it all follows Russia reducing the capacity of the Nord Stream natural gas pipelines into Europe to about 40% capacity.
Sean, 2 days in a row now, you have made sure that we've been talking about aircraft and airlines, and I'm very grateful for that because I love these stories. The International Air Transport Association believes that the industry might return to profitability next year.
It's great news given the battering the airlines have received since 2020. IATA, which is the International Air Transport Association, as you said, IATA, the global peak body for the sector, estimates that losses across the industry will be just under $10 billion this year. And next year, they'll start to make money. That's 2023. Last year, the industry lost $42 billion, and in 2020, it was a massive $138 billion. All COVID related, of course. North America is the gorilla in the market, and already that geography has recovered. It's actually tipped to make about $9 billion this year. That's North America. There are still risks: Ukraine, inflation, COVID, and potential shutdowns in China. China's domestic market accounted for 10% of global traffic in the year before COVID. It is a massive market.
That's big. I mean, it makes perfect sense, but until you actually put a figure on it just then, I hadn't realised just how big it was.
Yeah, exactly the same. When I was doing research for the story, I just didn't realise the domestic Chinese market is second only to the US.
It is fascinating when I love a good app, and I have spoken in the past about the International Space Station Spotter app, the ISS Spotter app, which is fantastic, and it seems that we might have converted a few people to that one based on the feedback we've had on social media, Sean. But my other favourite app is Flight Radar 24. Yep. I'm sure you would be a regular user of that one. And it's great to zoom out and you look at countries like the US and China and just see the sheer volume of aircraft moving around over those countries. That kind of gives you an impression of the scale of the domestic markets.
Incredible. In fact, as you were talking, I brought it up on my phone.
Me too. So neither of us are really focused on the podcast anymore. Now we're just watching planes.
Plenty of planes up and down the east coast of Australia, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's terrific.
At the moment, very busy time. Yeah.
Now, one last story, Sean, before we can just retire to look at our apps for a little bit longer. The United Kingdom has toughened regulations around buy now, pay later operators and will require customer affordability checks.
The United Kingdom is one of the first major jurisdictions to introduce legislation to govern buy now, pay later operators like Afterpay, Klarna and Zipco. While share prices of many of those players have fallen recently, customers still like the payment system. And in the end, customers do tend to win. In the UK, buy now, pay later lenders will have to ensure loans are affordable and advertisements need to be fair, clear and not misleading. Now, why do we care so much about this? Because other jurisdictions like Australia and US are considering exactly the same thing.
All right, now up next is the Fear and Greed Daily interview with Sharia Antia from global fund manager PGIM about cryptocurrencies.
I'm actually looking right now at Flight Radar at New York because Sharia is from New York and was talking to us all about cryptos. A very busy time around those major airports in New York at the moment too, Michael. However, you want to know what the interview was about, I'm sure. And PGIM is one of the really big global fund managers. It's done a report on cryptos, and it's fair to say that Sharia is not a fan of cryptos. It's very easy to get people to talk the good of cryptos. This guy talks about the not so good of crypto, and so it's well worth a listen for any investors or anyone that's interested in cryptocurrencies.
It's crazy seeing some of the flights in the US, Sean. I'm just looking at them now as well, just from some of just the regional centres going from place to place. And you're like, Jesus, there are so many aircraft cruising around the United States right now. I'm with you. I'm zooming in right now on Columbus.
Ohio.
And plenty of traffic around Columbus right now.
Right, there you go. Irrelevant to what we're doing here today. We should get back to the business of podcasting.
Completely irrelevant, isn't it? Alrighty, the interview with Sharia Antia is up next, and really he does get stuck in, so it is well worth a listen. It is coming up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Michael.
It's Wednesday, the 22nd of June, 2022. Make sure you're following the podcast and join us online on LinkedIn, Twitter and Facebook. I'm Michael Thompson, and that was Fear and Greed. Have a great day.